Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust the week goes well. I'd like to thank His Excellency Johan Borgstam, who's the Swedish ambassador, for lunch yesterday, and he's always very erudite, and he's got his finger on the 24-hour live stream. And of course I did joke a little bit about the submarine and the divers that keep popping up apparently on in the sea just off Sweden. But thank you, Johan, as ever. And this morning it was a pleasure attending the Safaricom Sustainability 2014 release. The link for that report, which is actually very much ahead of the curve, and kudos to them, frankly. There's a ton of detail in there. Lots of interesting details came out of that presentation. Gender balance is 1-to-1 in Safaricom, but it's not 1-to-1 at the upper echelon. Carbon footprint higher compared to last year, in part I think because of better data gathering and expansion. And frankly, as I said, kudos to them for doing this. Really, they're leading the way in that. And I'll put up a photograph that Sander Ojiambo took. I participated in the panel with Bob and with a fellow called Raouf Mazou, who's the country rep for the UNHCR. He's a very interesting man as well. Had a lot to say about the refugee situation, and it was very interesting indeed. Home thoughts. I like this quote from Paul Virilio: "There are eyes everywhere, no blind spot left. What shall we dream of when everything becomes visible? We'll dream of being blind." And on that note, I went back to that poster which is in The Great Gatsby. It's a big symbol, motif, eyes of T.J. Eckelberg, and Virilio reminded me of that. And then that quote, which I really like, which is "Speed now illuminates reality, whereas light once gave objects of the world their shape." I like this photograph titled "Essence of Elephants." The work has earned the overall title in this year's Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. The photographer says preparation and passion were key to achieving the winning shot, taken from just over 1 meter away. There was one particular day when a baby elephant raced past right in front of my camera, and I was ready. I had to be prepared for that moment, said Mr. Du Toit. He took the picture at a waterhole in Botswana's northern Tuli Game Reserve from a hide, a sunken freight container that provided a ground-level view. He had been going to the area 5 or 6 times a year for 10 years. I chose elephants because I feel a very special energy and connection when I'm around them. And I love elephants as well, and they're magnificent creatures, they really are, and so light on their feet. One day we were in the Amboseli, and this herd passed, just a few feet away from us. And you thought you were listening to ballet dancers, not big animals like the elephant. Attack on Parliament, killing of soldiers stuns Canada's capital. A gunman, and at one point they were reporting more than one, attacked Canada's Parliament on Wednesday with shots fired near where Prime Minister Stephen Harper was speaking, and a soldier was killed at a nearby war memorial, stunning the Canadian capital. The gunman in the Parliament building was shot dead, and Harper was safely removed. The killing of the Canadian soldier was the second this week, with a possible link to Islamic militants. The shooting followed an attack on 2 US soldiers in Quebec on Monday, carried out by a convert to Islam. US officials said that they had been advised the dead gunman in Wednesday's shooting was also a Canadian convert to Islam, and I'm going to come back to this point. Canadian police were investigating a man named Michael Zehaf-Bibeau as a possible suspect in Wednesday's attack, said a source familiar with the matter. US government sources said he was born Michael Joseph Hall, but later changed his name. And I wrote about this previously, where I said the richest hunting ground for these new 21st century serial killers, terrorists, and I was referring to IS, I was referring to Al-Shabaab, I was referring to this sort of scenario is among the disaffected in the Western world. IS and the likes of Al-Shabaab have proven accomplished and frightening and frightful exponents of the 21st century digital ecosystem. And what is so fascinating is that their media efforts all point west. The richest hunting ground for these new 21st century serial killers, terrorists, is among the disaffected in the Western world, and it reminded me of that book L'Étranger by Albert Camus. And these are people, I think, who've not sort of assimilated and not managed to sort of find a life for themselves in the West, and then you have this massive digital onslaught coming at them. I'll put up a photograph of Michael Zehaf-Bibeau, terrorist, Ottawa shooting suspect. Was known as a high-risk traveller. This photograph's from The Independent. I take you back to the 6th of October when I quoted, "In societies reduced to blur and glut, terror is the only meaningful act. There's too much everything, more things and messages and meanings that we can use in 10,000 lifetimes. Only the terrorists stand outside. The culture hasn't figured out how to assimilate him. It's confusing when they kill the innocent, but this is precisely the language of being noticed, the only language the West understands, the way they determine how we see them, the way they dominate the rush of endless streaming images." And then take you back to Paul Virilio, who talks of a panic-driven tele-reality and resulting in an odd kind of emotional synchronization, in which terror must be instantaneously felt by all, on the scale of a global terrorism. He's talking about natural catastrophes, the Columbia shuttle disaster, the attack on the Twin Towers, gets world coverage and is put on a loop. Our minds are literally besieged by these weapons of mass communication, as he calls them, creating a panic-driven tele-reality and resulting in an odd kind of emotional synchronization in which terror must be instantaneously felt by all on the scale of a global terrorism. Virilio maintains that the global village has created hyper-terrorism as its integral accident, just as derailment is the integral accident of a train. The Pentagon is eager to exploit the audio-visual impact of real-time mass communication. Remember Saddam's statue being toppled. But unfortunately, so are the terrorists. The same impulse drives contemporary art, says Virilio, and he often refers and returns to Stockhausen's incendiary remark that 9/11 was the greatest work of art ever. I'll put up an image of this book, which I'm ordering now, called City of Panic by Paul Virilio. The European Union would save itself by saving Ukraine, says George Soros, warned that Russia's expansionism poses an existential threat to the EU and called for greater material support for Ukraine. Argues that Putin's mix of authoritarianism and aggressive nationalism represents an alternative model to Western liberal democracies, referring to the admiration for the Russian president expressed by Nigel Farage, UKIP leader, Marine Le Pen, president of France's Front National, and Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Europe is facing a challenge from Russia to its very existence. Neither the European leaders nor their citizens are fully aware of this challenge or know how best to deal with it, Soros writes. Said the EU had become a dysfunctional relationship between creditor and debtor nations, resulting in widespread resentment. Putin has established good relations with those agitating against Europe. He said the failure of Europe as an experiment in supranational government would make Russia a potent threat. Collapse of Ukraine would be a tremendous loss for NATO, the European Union and the United States. A victorious Russia would become much more influential within the EU and pose a potent threat to the Baltic states with large ethnic Russian populations. So he's saying that Western support of Ukraine requires an immediate cash injection of at least $20 billion with a promise of more. The European Union, he says, would save itself by saving Ukraine. The question is, who took the fight? to whom, and I think ultimately we know who did. And who is parked up whom's backside? NATO is parked right up against Russia. It's not Russia parked somewhere off Texas's border. And frankly, I do not see two simultaneous pivots as being feasible. I put up a photograph of Soros, and obviously I'm a great admirer of his, in particular when he raided the Bank of England. A man jumped the White House fence on Wednesday evening. Dogs got him, apparently, and I referred to this on the 6th of October when I wrote that piece, Current World Affairs Fluid and Uncertain. And I said it was only very recently that I actually studied the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and what is indisputable is that geolocating Lee Harvey Oswald and then studying the head action of the president confirms that Oswald could not have killed him. It made me think, who or whom can shoot a president stone cold dead and spin a narrative so effectively for half a century? And then I said it's a remarkable thing. Last week, and this was the first week of October, President Obama accepted the resignation of the Secret Service Director Julia Pearson after a series of lapses. Just over 2 weeks ago, a man named Omar J. Gonzalez scaled the White House fence and managed to get deep into the executive mansion before being captured. On September 16, an armed security guard with a criminal record was allowed to get on an elevator in Atlanta with Obama. And I was talking about the general fluidity of the world, and interestingly, yesterday they described the situation in Ottawa as fluid. The first signal in the noise, in my opinion, is that these were not lapses, but very deliberate messages, and that the president needs to exercise extreme caution. Put up a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald. Let's move to the markets. Euro 126.67. We're down big from that 128 level we were not too long ago. Dollar index 85.74. I remain extremely bullish about the dollar. Japanese yen softer 107.52. Swissy 0.9526. The pound, which was close to 162, back at 160.12. Aussie 0.8789, that's hanging in there. India rupee 61.17, South Korean won 10.5634, Rial 248.78, Egyptian pound, probably the most stable currency in the world over the last 3 months, 714.96, and the rand firmer through 11 at 10.94.44, probably a trading sell. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I think this recent retracement was a very, very viable buying opportunity. I'm extremely bullish, as I was on the 29th of September, and we're considerably higher than when I wrote that, when I was saying there's a small window for sharks as dollar rises. And now the point I was making is that the dollar has just started getting going. There will be blood in the water. There is a small window if we want to be the sharks. And on that note, I'll put up the famous Damien Hirst installation called The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, aka the tiger shark encased in formaldehyde solution. Euro dollar 126.67. I'm still calling for 120 before year end there. Crude oil, that's had a bad session overnight, and yesterday it's at $80.43. I think it can go as low as $50 in an extreme blowout situation. It dropped $1.97 yesterday, lowest close for a front month contract since the 28th of June 2012. And I wrote about this on the 13th of October when I said who kneecapped prices in global oil markets. And I was talking about demand and supply, the extra net add that's happening because of displacement, because of US shale production. And I said, you know, the conditions are optimal for a complete washout as low as $50 a barrel. Markets overshoot, crude oil does it big time, and every model needs to consider such a price outcome. The big game changers being US crude output, which rose from 5.7 million barrels per day in 2011 to as high as 8.88 million barrels a day not too long ago. You've got Saudi Arabia, who will obviously take instructions. I think they've been instructed. And Iran selling oil at fire sale prices. And I think basically this was by design, and a very clever design. And I think that, you know, President Obama and his administration are like Norman Bates and Psycho. They're slashing at this price. They're using it as a geopolitical spear to put pressure on places like Russia and Venezuela. I think my point is that Barack Obama has taken control of the crude oil cockpit. He's in charge of the airplane. He has control of all the instruments. And it's been a wild ride for the last few weeks, which could get a whole lot wilder. I'll put up a photograph of Obama, and I'll put up a 6-month graph of crude oil. And I think it's in very big trouble. Gold, which had been trading higher, squeezing some shorts, 12.39.60 last. I expect new 2014 lows, particularly because of my forecast for the dollar. Coming to Africa, official World Health Organization Ebola toll nears 5,000, with true number nearer 15,000. At least 4,877 people have died. The world's worst recorded outbreak of Ebola. At least 9,936 cases of the disease have been recorded as of October 19, they said on Wednesday. The true toll may be 3 times as much. Said real numbers of cases are believed to be much higher than reported by a factor 1.5 in Guinea, 2 in Sierra Leone, and 2.5 in Liberia. Death rate is thought to be about 70%. This would suggest a toll of almost 15,000. Transmission in the past was most intense in the capital cities of Monrovia and Freetown, while Guinea's capital Conakry reported 18 confirmed cases, its second highest weekly total since the outbreak began. And I conclude by saying at this point the tail risk, which I've been speaking about before, is massively underestimated. On the 25th of August, I said the Ebola virus continues to gain velocity. The World Health Organization themselves on August 22nd said that the magnitude of the outbreak has been underestimated. They talked of an existence of an invisible caseload of patients who are not being detected by the surveillance system, and spoke of the existence of numerous shadow zones. My concern is that viruses are non-linear and exponential, and I don't think we've hit that maximum acceleration moment, or Virilio calls it the vitesse de libération, the escape velocity. Gladwell says the tipping point is that magic moment when an idea, trend, or social behavior, read Ebola virus, crosses a threshold, tips and spreads like wildfire. I participated in that Al Jazeera interview, and watch it from the second half, because I made a lot of these points then, and of course everybody then was not really aware of what I was, the mathematics of Ebola. And the severity in Ebola lies in the speed of infections, what Virilio calls the escape velocity. Viruses exhibit nonlinear exponential characteristics, and essentially I don't think we've entered the parabolic phase, and that's what I was saying, the mutation, the tail risk that it is in fact airborne or aerosolized. That was something else I was mentioning, and then I was talking about the Black Swan by Taleb, and saying that essentially that residual tail risk is not being measured accurately in my view. I'll put up an image of the Ebola virus 3D. Nestle says they're keeping their West African plants open, ready to act if Ebola spreads. No plans to close any of its 8 factories or curb output in cocoa and coffee-rich West and Central Africa because of Ebola, but is ready to adapt if it spreads. The CEO said on Wednesday, Nestle's factories in the region, including both Ghana, Ivory Coast, produce chocolate beverages, instant coffee, powdered milk, cereals, bottled water. Company has yet to suffer any supply or transport disruptions due to Ebola nearby Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. That could happen, but it hasn't happened yet, said Paul Bulka. He was interviewed in Mexico, where they're inaugurating a dairy plant touted as the first of its kind to cut fresh water consumption to 0. He said Nestle had no plans to shutter plants in West Africa. We're not there yet. I hope we never get there. Whatever happens, we're going to have to adjust. Ebola has not reached the Ivory Coast and Ghana, where 60% of the world's cocoa beans are produced. Cocoa prices are already going up, Bulka said, adding that he hoped they would not rise any further. I'll put up a 1-year cocoa chart, but I think the risk of contamination into Ghana and Ivory Coast is very high. South Africa cut its growth forecast to 1.4%, which is the worst since the recession. They previously forecast 2.7% in February, and now they're forecasting 1.4%. Interesting, the value of global private equity deals targeting Africa has more than doubled in the first half of 2014. That's an interesting point. South African all-share up 3.23% this year, but 4,570 points below a record high from earlier in the year. Dollar rand 10.95.44. I'll put up a 6-month chart. I think it's a trading sell. Egyptian pound steady as you like, 7.1496. Egyptian stock market up 29.666% year to date, but 1,107 points below a multi-year high set on September 30. Nigeria all shares down 5.64% this year, but has rebounded 797 points since the 17th of October. The Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index is up 3.543% in 2014. Kenya Power here in Kenya reported full-year earnings. They announced that the earnings per share accelerated 88.06%. Revenue topped 100 billion, expanded 18.543%. Gross margin up 22.539%. Finance costs went up, they're borrowing more money, that went up 60.68%. Full year profit up before tax up 55.22%. Profit after tax up 87.4%. Earnings per share up 88.06%. Plus they're paying a dividend of 50 cents a share, which is meaningful. They say the rise in profit is due to increased sales, tariff review, and enhanced system efficiency. Electricity sales grew 9.8%, which combined with an increased average yield led to a plus 30.6% increase in sales revenue. The Kenya shilling is at 89, the figure. It has been there for a while and is showing good Teflon-dash resilience. Nairobi all share turned high yesterday. It's up 17.511% this year, but 2.943% below a record closing high reached last month. NSE 20 is 155 points below a more than 6-year high reached last month. CMC have said they've given up their bid to recover billions in a Jersey slush fund. New owners of motor dealer CMC Holdings have given up the fight to recover billions of shillings that former directors allegedly siphoned from the company and stashed in secret Jersey Island accounts. Mr. Mark Cass, the new CEO of CMC, said the company is not interested in pursuing the offshore accounts that were allegedly set up by former directors and shareholders. We want to leave that legacy behind and progress with our vision for the company. These things happened a long time ago and we frankly don't know what exactly happened. Instead, he said Alpha Time, which was wholly acquired CMC Holdings, will focus on expanding market share and growing earnings. Of course, there are a lot of people caught up in the crosshairs. Joshua Kule, who served as the private secretary to former President Daniel Moi, former Attorney General Charles Jonjo, billionaire Jeremiah Kireni, who recently wrote a book, former CMC MD Martin Forster, and CMC founder deceased Jack Ben Zimra. A forensic audit by South African firm Weber Wenzel established that the Jersey Secret Slush Fund had received £8.6 million in commissions between 1977 and October 2013. The real estate consultancy Haas Property Index shows that the average sale price has increased by 3.1% in the third quarter of 2014 against a 1.5% increase in the same quarter of 2013. I think we're going to see significantly lower interest rates, and the oil price is going to help a great deal in this regard. And therefore we're going to get a second leg of a rally going in the property market. And typically I've seen it all over the world. The moment rates come into single figures, that's a huge, huge signal. The average price change for all types of middle and high-end houses since the beginning of the year is 4.7% against 3% in 2013. Yesterday, the all share traded 545.453 million shillings. Equity market here in Nairobi has been much more resilient than in Lagos and in Johannesburg. Kenya Orchards has now rallied 5,733% this year. I missed that completely. Incredibly, it started the year with a market cap of less than $500 million. It's now $37.949 million. Safaricom, stronger yesterday, going to report first half results on the 4th of November, expected to rally into that earnings release. Kenya Airways traded better. They're going to get a significant kicker from the lower oil price. TPS Serena bounced 1.379%. That's on the way higher. It's been egregiously priced for a while. Uchimi closed unchanged at 980. Rights issue coming at 9 shillings. I'm expecting someone to position into that rights issue. Britam, that's been on a losing streak. It's corrected 27.58% since closing at a record on the 23rd of September, quite a bit in the news. But still, even after that correction, up 73.26%. Kenal Kobil, there's been a lot of buying in this stock, and it's up 21.11% since the 21st of August, and on heavy volume. Once again, thank you so much for stopping by. I am grateful, and I wish you a continued good week.